Hey, thanks for coming back to the channel. In this video, we've got a quick follow-up from the NAMM show where we spent some time with the folks at PreSonus. Their booth was packed full of people the whole show, partially as a result of their announcing a new line of USB-C audio interfaces at the show. We saw the 68C, the 1810C, and the 1824C models firsthand after the announcement, and now we've got the 1810C here on the bench to take for a test drive. They also sent over a Quantum 2 Thunderbolt interface that I'll be covering in another video very soon, so be sure to subscribe and turn on the notifications so you don't miss that. So let's dive in with the 1810C. The first thing we should know is that this unit, and indeed the whole series, exist as an update to the existing studio line of lightweight, budget-minded USB 2 interfaces from PreSonus. The 1810C specifically changes very little from its predecessor, the 1810, except for the smaller USB-C type connection and the restyling of the case. Unlike those Quantum interfaces based around the Thunderbolt protocol, these units do not make any additional use of the USB-C's potential. We're looking at similar USB 2 technology that PreSonus has been using and building upon in this line for years. With this unit, we have 4 of the well-known PreSonus X-Max preamps, 2 of which can accommodate mic, instrument, or line level sources, and 2 that are either mic or line level only. Phantom power is unfortunately switched at all 4 of the inputs at once with this soft button here. We find a button to toggle between the instrument and line level on channel 1 and 2 or just below that. We have physical gain controls for each of these 4 inputs over here. These are not digitally recallable or remote controllable like the Quantum series, but they do afford us 80 dB of gain adjustment to microphone and instrument level and 40 dB of adjustment on line level sources. Input and output meters are simple but effective, covering minus 40 dB to 0 dB full scale with clip lights that engage at minus 0.5 dB on all of the meters. A mute button up here in the top right quickly mutes all the outputs, while an AB button down here allows us to toggle between the main and the auxiliary mixes into the first headphone amplifier here. Finally, we have independent volume controls for the 2 headphone monitor amplifiers, as well as the main output volume control. Around the back are the rest of our 18 inputs, with balanced line level inputs for channels 5, 6, 7, and 8, channels 9 and 10 being digital SPDIF inputs, and then 11 through 18 being ADAT optical. Output-wise, let's start with our headphone outputs, and these are 2 independent headphone amplifiers with independent volume controls, and you can build independent mixes for those. So that's really handy if you've got a couple of different musicians, or for something like a podcast where 2 people may want to hear different things in their mix. After that, we have our main outputs. Now, all of these outputs are DC coupled, balanced line level analog outputs here for outputs 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. 1 and 2 are our main output that's controlled by this volume control around on the front. 3, 4, 5, and 6 can be assigned as needed. Those show up in the control software here. This is Universal Control, and we can see mixes 3, 4, and then 5, 6, and you can build those mixes accordingly depending on what your needs are. Completing our outputs are numbers 7 and 8, which come out on the SPDIF digital output. There is no optical audio output on this unit. MIDI is featured on all of the Studio Series interfaces. There's no surprises here, but it is a handy feature if you need that functionality in your setup, and having it included in your audio interface makes configuring it in your DAW very simple. Under the hood, we find A to D conversion handled by AKM's AK5558VN chipset, and that provides 120 dB of dynamic range at the inputs. At the heart of the 1810C, though, is the XMO 16-core USB 2 microcontroller. These off-the-shelf audio-specific microcontrollers allow a quick development platform for PreSonus to build upon efficiently, delivering proven high-quality and low-latency audio performance in a variety of sizes and configurations that they can choose for each product being developed. Overall build quality on these units is quite good, and as usual with PreSonus, it's a really solid value for the money in my opinion. Dollars have been saved here by choosing quality but maybe not the most expensive top shelf name brand components internally, and including only the features most typically needed by customers in this price range. Things like the optical input for expansion when you don't necessarily always need those optical outputs as well. If you do need more flexibility, the Quantum is is there with things like additional ADAT optical inputs and outputs and word clock inputs and outputs, but you're trading off some of your balanced line level outputs, which arguably in a mobile situation for most users, you might be more likely to need those more often. Patching into something like a PA system, having a bank of 6 balanced DC coupled line level outputs is very important in live situations. That DC coupling allowing you to do things like send control voltage, which is an instance where a lightweight budget interface may be used with something like QLab or some other show control software. This video is made possible in part by our good friends at Electro Sound Systems. If you want to see what goes on at a real working live sound shop, their YouTube channel is for you. In the shop, on the job, and on the workbench, they're taking you along for the fun at electrosoundsystems.com. Working pretty seamlessly with Universal Control so far. I've had a couple of issues where it doesn't connect right away when I launch Universal Control, but if you just let it sit there for a moment or so, it will recognize the unit and it populates just fine. Another issue I have seen so far is when you configure, for instance, running a microphone through and then just patch through the main out. I'm recording to a Zoom H6 recorder here off of the main output. If you then turn the unit off and then turn it back on without it being connected to a computer, I have had an issue where the audio does not then pass the same signal path as it did when the computer was connected, and that can be an issue for sure if you're taking this in mobile situations and you need it to be configured. So I'll be doing more testing on that just to see or if that's a firmware issue with this particular release. So more on that in the future. Where I have tested and had good success so far with the 1810C has been with iOS. Works perfectly with my iPad Mini 4 as well as my iPhone 8, with all the inputs and outputs showing up as they should in programs like GarageBand and being able to play music out of it and record to it. The one issue, again, you're going to have there is if you're only using the interface along with an iOS device, you don't have any way to get into that universal control and configure your mixes or outputs. So it'll be interesting to see how much of a hindrance that is in using this as a mobile device, because obviously if you only have an iOS device, you're missing out on some functionality there. Software monitoring is also a necessity with this unit for anything complex you're going to do, any sort of effects you might need to add to your monitor mix. Hardware monitoring in this unit, obviously, if you have the computer and you can get your Universal Control working, you can hardware monitor with pretty much zero latency here. But if you need to add any effects to this whatsoever, you're going to need to do software monitoring. There are no effects engines, there's no EQ, compression, or anything built into this iteration of Universal Control. You're literally just able to route the different inputs to the outputs at various levels. There's not much of a mixer built in. So for anything you'll need to add, you'll need to do that in software monitoring. And with Studio One 4, there is a native low latency monitoring mode that you can enable to use instead of hardware monitoring, and I'll be testing that. It's supposed to minimize the latency for situations where you need things like a reverb added to a vocalist for tracking, and we'll see how that works in the future. So more on that if you're interested in low latency monitoring. If that's something you absolutely need, if the mixer function of your interface is very, very important to you, coming from something like a Mark of the Unicorn 896, this may feel like it's lacking in the mixer end, as you really do only have level and pan controls to choose from. In practice, I'm seeing metered latency as low as 5.2 milliseconds round trip on iOS as measured with the latency meter app, and I'll throw up some screenshots here of the different reported measurements from Studio One 4 for comparison with round trip latency on a MacBook Pro, 2015 MacBook Pro. Overall, if you're in the market for an interface of this size and in this price point and configuration, the 1810C is an option that's worth looking at. Contenders in this similar price point, a lot of people will suggest things like the Focusrite Scarlett 18i8, but that's only got 2 TRS balanced outputs, which is noticeably less than the 6 that this comes with. So for live sound use, if you're running something like QLab or doing some other sort of show control, surround sound, or multi-channel output that you need to have balanced, specifically DC coupled outputs, this could really be the unit to meet your needs. Now, alternatively, for the same price, you could have something like the Zoom H6 recorder, which is also an interface, and that's got a potential for a couple more mic inputs. That could have 6 mic inputs total and the ability to run off batteries and record right in the box. So if you're looking in this kind of $400 USB 2 interface with, 4+ channels of mic pre's, you've got some options, and the 1810C is definitely one that you should look at. Again, specifically for live sound use or show control or things like QLab where you need those multiple outputs. You'll have to decide what setup works best for you, but for now I'll be testing this 1810C head-to-head with my Zoom H6 and the Quantum 2, and we'll see how they shake out after a couple of months worth of use. Thanks for watching. Be sure to leave a comment or a like, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notifications to stay up to date with future videos. I'll see you next time.